And if everyone could mute your mics if you haven't already, we'd appreciate that. So today's program will be primarily conducted by Katie Johnson, who is new to our office. I'll let her introduce herself and give a little information on her background. And the focus mainly of this initiative is to provide whatever assistance our office can to help with processing legitimate expenditures on grants. I know we've seen in the past, those of us who have been in sponsored programs for a while or in the grants accounting office, that there's sometimes it certainly can fall by the wayside. There's plenty for departmental personnel to do and PIs to do. So sometimes getting the charges on grants kind of falls by the wayside. So this initiative will provide some oversight and reach out to see if there's any assistance we can provide on processes and review of the grant initiatives. Excuse me. And I will say, since we're closing out the end of the semester, this is a good time to mention and to remind folks that if you do have summer salary on grants to post, particularly for any effort that will take place through June, which is the end of the period that will count for the next round of the R1 rating, then please take a look at that and see if those can be processed in a timely manner. So I think that's all I have to say. I think before Katie gets into it, Doug, our Vice President, Doug Delahanty's on the call, so I will let Doug make a few remarks.
Thanks, Bev. I appreciate it. Just a couple of seconds because I really want to get to what Katie has to say. Just as a reminder to the group, I think one of the reasons that Katie has her position really dedicated towards tracking expenditures is that we tend to return a significant amount of dollars each year. And so these are grant dollars that are hard fought for and competed for and awarded. And then they're returned back because they either weren't tracked correctly, they ran out of time, didn't spend them, so on and so forth. And the problem with that is, first off, we worked hard to get them, so we'd want to spend them. We don't get to count those dollars that go back unless they are spent. And realistically, returning them really annoys the funders at the same time, because as you move into a new fiscal year, their accounts are all balanced. They're working with their next year's budget, and having dollars come back cause them problems, and therefore they start to get annoyed with you for returning it. So what Katie's really focused on is one of our pillars, if you will, for trying to address expenditures. So in addition to some of the investments we're making in increasing grant funding and expenditures, we're trying to make sure that grants are spent out correctly. And so what she'll talk about today is how she's working with PIs and how she's working with business folks and everybody else on how do we identify those grants, not that are done in a couple of weeks. I mean, because there's not a lot you could do at the end, but far enough ahead of time. And what's the plan for spending out these dollars? What's the plan for, wait a minute, it looks like you've had this for 2 years and none of your personnel have been charged to it. So how about if we kind of get that fixed right now? So all of those kind of things, and she'll talk much more about it. We're very, very excited to have Katie as part of RASP, and I'm very much looking forward to this. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Doug. I actually will jump in with one more quick housekeeping point. If you have questions, by all means, drop them in the chat. Lori will be monitoring the questions, and we'll either address them during the session if it's pertinent then or toward the end of the program. Thanks. Okay, Katie, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, can everybody see my slide, research expenditures, overview of outreach process and preliminary results? Looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I started over in sponsored programs on March 1st, and it's been a new process. As Bev and Doug both talked about, we're finding out what's going on as we're moving forward. So this is kind of a preliminary group, and I wanted to walk you through what I've found, how many people I've reached out to, and a little bit of who I am. At the end of the session, I know I'm recognizing a lot of names on here, and I've worked with you recently on some of these emails. I just want to put it out there right now for departmental staff, for faculty members, I'm here to help you. If there's a way that I'm reaching out to you or that I'm not reaching out to you that would be a benefit or I'm causing problems, let me know. You don't have to do it in this meeting. You can email me, call me. I'm open to critique and to changing systems so that things work properly for everybody. It's a big community. It takes a lot to get a grant. It takes a lot to keep a grant managed correctly. And we want to make sure we're all on the same team working together and not stepping on each other's toes. All right, so with that, let's get into this. And you might hear my mouse sing. It doesn't have a very good connection, so my computer sings to me sometimes. So who am I? I had the pleasure of working in the Department of Biological Sciences as their grant administrator. I helped with both pre and post-award activities within the department. You may have caught my previous brown bag presentation, in which I gave an overview of how I monitored expenditures from the departmental's perspective. Since giving that presentation, I've joined the Office of Sponsored Programs to help in the new initiative that Doug just laid out. The preliminary goal up until June 30th, 2023 is to focus primarily on separately budgeted research grants, checking in with indexes that are due to end shortly to make sure that research-related expenditures have been applied appropriately. The first group of grants that I've reached out to were 63 separately budgeted research grants. I've reached out to all of those, and for all the ones that I did not hear back from, I have sent out a follow-up email. I really do, even if it's just a one-sentence email back to me, thank you for the email, we're looking into it, we've got it under control, this is what we're planning to do. A short little response back to me lets me know that A, you received my email, B, you're connected to your grant and you've got a plan, whatever that plan is. Sometimes if it's a fixed priced index and you know that you're going to have funds left over, you can just let me know, hey, we know that we're not going to expend it all. We know that we're going to have funds left over, and that's just part of what we planned on. It just lets me know that you got the email, and I'll stop bugging you, because otherwise, if I don't hear from you, I'm going to keep reaching out. All right, so the next group that I've pulled up is a group of about 60 projects. These are the grants that are due to end between July 1st and September 30th, 2023. I anticipate continuing to pull grants in this manner in groups of about 3 to 4 months at a time, and then working my way through them. What I'd like to do is eventually start reaching out to PIs and departments and grants accountants, maybe 4 months in advance. You don't want it to be too soon, but you also don't. We've run into a couple of problems that really are difficult to solve within 3 months, especially if the problem lies with a subaward. Fixing things with a subaward is very difficult to do in a 3-month timeline. So let's see here. So I'm currently not reaching out to all funded projects. You might have heard me mention it several times that these are separately budgeted research projects. We might eventually ramp up to that where I kind of check in with everything, but not right now. We'll need to do that once we have a functional system set up that works for us, is tracking what we need to track, not tracking too much. We're also working with Kent State IT to try and come up with possibly a new database for us to use to help track when I've reached out to people and subsequent actions from that initial contact. Right now, I'm just working with an Excel sheet, and it takes a lot of back and forth from email to Excel. During this first phase, about 2 months since I've been here, I'm also collecting preliminary data on what types of expenses are typically not being used as budgeted. That is helping us know, we kind of had an idea of where we thought we might have problems, but this is actually giving us some data to look at and go, this is where we're really having problems, and then we can dig into it more. At the end of this presentation, I'll share with you these results, but first I want to walk you through what an email from me is comprised of and how I came up with it. So if you haven't received an email from me yet, this will give you a heads up. If you have, it might help you understand it better. So what I'll do is I will start with the ledger report. So I've done this for about 85 grants so far. I'll pull the ledger report, and I'll go through and quickly analyze the burn rate. I'll take a look at posted expenditures plus posted commitments and divide it by the budget as represented in Banner. If you've just recently processed a budget revision, I'll usually see that and try to update the numbers if they haven't been posted by the grant accountant yet. I don't always catch it, but I'm trying to. So this will give you a burn rate. It's a really quick way for me to look for possible areas that either faculty members need to take a look at for unusual spending. Here, let me put this on so you know where I'm looking. Sorry. So I'll flag for unusual spending, either over, under, not budgeted. And this is for the PI and the department to review and see if correction needs to happen. I'm looking at this as an outsider very quickly. I don't know the details of the grant. I'm just saying, hey, this looks a little funny. Maybe there's a completely valid reason. Maybe there's a problem, but that's really up to the PI and the department to dig into. I can help you if you don't know where to find the information, but I'm not going to do all of the digging up front for you because it might be a waste of my time because it might not be a problem. I'll also check to see if there is a revision or a no cost extension that's been recently processed. And I'll notate this on what I send you. If, as I'm reviewing this, it looks like additional time may be needed, I will try to include directions on how to request a no-cost extension. And you can find that NSF runs through research.gov. Anything else will go through an IPATH, institutional prior approval form. Right now, we're still using DocuSign until about mid-May, and then it'll transition to dynamic forms. And let's take a look at what a ledger report looks like. So this is an example of a moderately complicated one. I've removed most of the identifying information just because I don't want to draw anybody to the center of the room and start pointing at things. So in reviewing this, I notated it's already in a no-cost extension. It's an applied grant, so it's not a fixed price. And it's going to end in about 2 months from when I pulled this ledger report. Running down the burn rate, when I looked into this, I noticed that a budget revision had been processed in July, but none of the funds that had been rebudgeted to this account line were used. So that makes me wonder, okay, did we forget to move somebody's appointment over? Did that person leave the university? This is all information that the PI and the department will know, but I'm just pointing to it and saying, hey, is there a problem here? You'll also see faculty AY, summer. We'll move down the ledger report. Here I also notated that the grad students are a little behind. Are we missing any effort? We might not be. Undergrads went over. So it's just a quick review. One of the other things that you'll want to review when you receive one of these or on your own is to take a look at benefits, overall benefits without tuition. So remove tuition. And I just do that by subtracting it from the totals and then dividing them by each other. If these are fairly close, you're pretty safe. However, I've noticed that sometimes personnel will be completely spent out or overspent, and there'll be a good chunk of money sitting down here in benefits. It's not going to help anybody to have money sitting in benefits when they could be used for something else to support the research. So I'll talk about this later on, but this is something that we could fix fairly easily. On this one, it did not have any tuition, which is unusual because it was budgeted for and it supported grad students. After the PI and the department received this ledger report, they did track down tuition and move it on to the grant. I also looked at travel. There's about $5,000 sitting here. Just asked, are you going to use it? We only have 2 months left. And then the complicated part about this particular grant is that it has a large section devoted to 4 different subawards. So, and then the other, I'm going to give you more detail on this because you probably can't see it. What I do want to draw attention to is sometimes when you receive a ledger report from me, there will be additional tabs that are providing information for you to quickly look up things. Like I noticed there was only 1 graduate student insurance disbursement when it had supported several students across time. Again, it could be valid. Maybe the graduate students didn't sign up for health insurance until that 1 academic year. And don't be worried if you don't have any tabs. It just means I didn't quickly notice anything that you might want to look at. So here's an analysis of the subawards. And you don't need to know all of this, but what I did quickly is I looked at, okay, the grant at Kent State is 91% expended. All of these other subawards are looking at close, except for this one. What's going on with the University of Pennsylvania? Why are they so far behind what everybody else is doing? That is something that a PI should reach out on and should honestly be following throughout the life of the grant. I then did a quick calculation of what is left after pulling out the amounts that we've committed to pay to our subawards. This gives us an idea of how much Kent State's budget remains to be used. And that's pulled out separately because we have control over this. We don't necessarily have quick control over these. We would have to negotiate and notify the subaward that, hey, we're going to reduce your subaward, and that could take more than the 2 months that we have left. Another thing that I want you to note, when you're looking at things, you need to be mindful of if I've said, is this the total remainder, or if I break it down between directs and indirects. So this is the total remainder. The PI actually has about $51,000 of direct costs that they can expend. So that would be the ledger report that you would receive. And there would be an email where I would attach that, any no cost extension directions that you might need. And I would include the grant accountant, Bev, and the departmental staff administrator if I can identify them. So what am I seeing so far? I've reviewed 90 grants. I have not reached out to all of them because some of them are very peculiar grants that have very specific needs, and outreach from me would not be beneficial at this time. Out of those 90 grants, the day that I pulled the ledger report, we have $5.3 million in remaining unobligated balances. This is based only on what's reporting in Banner. There might be commitments and expenses that are not in there yet, and departmental staff may have additional information on this, but this is the official financial system, and that is what it is showing me at the time that I pulled the ledger report. It's not that many grants, and it's a pretty significant amount of money, and I think that's why we're trying to reach out in time to help remind people, hey, is there something going on here? Have we missed something? Did a cost not get applied? Did something slow down and actually you're going to need to request a no cost extension? As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to reach out, and I'm going to reach out again if I don't hear from you. So I've probably sent out emails to about 85 people, and I've gotten about 57 responses. Of those, several of them have turned into budget revisions, and probably about a third of them are thinking about no cost extensions. So as I'm working through the ledger reports, I will notate just by category name what I'm noticing as the most underspent, the next most underspent, and the third most underspent category. I'm not notating the dollar amount, mainly because each grant is a massive difference in dollars. We have some that are multi-million-dollar grants, some that are $30,000 grants. So having the dollar amount without all the other information, I'd have to make it a percent of the award to make it that useful. Right now, I'm just collecting preliminary data. So making quick little notes on what categories am I noticing per grant that are not being used, and then putting those together, this is a visual of what I'm noticing. And it was a little surprising from what I guessed, but other things are not that surprising. So other professional fees, I'm noticing is showing up a lot as being underexpended. And this could be for a lot of different reasons. Some of the ones that quickly come to mind are there issues with onboarding into Payment Works? Is there an issue in getting an invoice from the vendor that matches Payment Works? Are we working on getting them through an independent contractor process? Did the research go in a different direction? Were you able to find an in-house facility to do what you had originally budgeted as other professional fees? These are all things that you know, if I send this email, you go, oh yeah, I have $10,000 sitting in other professional fees. Maybe I need to rebudget that to a different area. Another section that I've noticed and touched on was the subcontract. Really, truly, this is where the project director, the PI, you're going to have to take the lead on this. This is really up to you to stay in close contact with your subawards, to keep track of does their invoicing speed, rate, and amount match what they say they're doing. The amount of research that they've done is at 50%, but they've invoiced us for 90% of their award. Does that match? Do they have upfront costs and then the research is going to catch up, or does that not really match with your understanding? And if you find an issue with that, then you need to reach out to your grant accountant and let them know so they can do follow-up with that subaward and the invoice. You also need to keep an idea on if they've completed their research. If your subaward has completed their research and there are funds remaining, we have to receive an invoice that's marked final before we can release any remaining funds in their particular line, because we have a contract with them saying that, hey, we've set aside this much of our budget for you to do the research you said you were going to do. We can't just take that money away from them without some communication and negotiations. But if they send us that invoice that's marked final, we're done with what we said we were going to do, we've sent you all of our costs, then we can pull that money out and use it for something else that's programmatically appropriate and beneficial to the research. Another line on here, and this might just be an artifact of the time that I'm looking at these grants, is summer salary. That's hitting pretty high for a cost, because most faculty members are going to want to get their summer salary, and I think it's just because it hasn't hit yet, is not encumbered. Benefits. This is what I talked about earlier. I think this is our easiest one to tackle first and correct. I think about the 6-month mark before a grant ends. If you look at your grant and quickly review, you know who you're going to have for personnel, you know what their benefits are most likely going to be until the end of the project. You can plug that in and see if you have a significant amount left in the benefits line. And this happens because when we're building a grant budget in Quali for the submission, we have to budget for the worst case scenario, the most expensive that personnel line could cost you. If we don't budget for the most expensive person that could be in that line, and then you get the grant, you're not going to be happy with us when you run out of money in benefits. So it does happen that benefits will be over budgeted, but it's better to go that way than the other way. It's just, we want to catch it in time that we can use those funds for something that will be useful to the project, not leave them there and return them to the funder. Another thing that I've noticed, we talked about tuition quickly. This one surprised me. Equipment. I've noticed a couple of problems with this, where equipment was budgeted on the index, but was not used. And when I talked to the PI or sent them this information, they said, well, wait a minute, I have that piece of equipment sitting in my lab. Of course we bought it. We've been using it for 9 months. Why isn't it in equipment? What's been happening, and this is where as a PI, you really need to help us also. If you purchased equipment, you need to make sure that it posts correctly on your grant. And if it doesn't, there's a process for correcting that. But the people, after you place the order downstream, are not a scientist in your field. We're not going to know that widget 3, 6, and 9 and wingbat 13 are only useful if you plug them together, and that by the time you plug them together, it costs more than $5,000 and it's a piece of equipment. If those costs came through individually, we're not going to catch it. We're not going to know it's a piece of equipment, and you have to help us identify that and then correct it. We don't want to leave that type of a cost in supplies because it's going to look bad on an audit. It's going to look like we're trying to collect indirect costs on something that we really shouldn't be collecting indirect costs on. So even if you have the money left over in the grant, you can support the indirect costs. Please don't leave it in the supply line. It needs to go in equipment if it is equipment. And that can be done by processing a cost transfer workflow, or sometimes grants accounting is willing to do a journal entry. And I'm sorry if I'm talking too fast. I will definitely leave time for questions. So how to correct an error or change in plans. Change in plans happen. You submitted for the grant. You probably got it a year to a year and a half after you submitted. Things have already changed. Maybe there was a delay in setting it up by 6 months and you planned to have summer salary, but that first year you were in the middle of October before you could actually do anything. It's okay. We just need to do budget revisions and correct things as we move through the life of the grant. You will notice down here that I linked to the awards management info and forms. This awards management. You're going to find a wealth of information in there about how to charge things to your grant, how to hire personnel to a grant, what's an allowable cost, what is not typically an allowable cost. It's a starting point. It's federal guidelines are a starting point. University guidelines sometimes narrow that down. And then you also have your funders guidelines. They may have certain restrictions on what's allowable and not allowable. We can help you with that, but we can't always search down every single little thing. So if you have an idea as a PI of what's allowed and not allowed, that's great. If you need a little help, please reach out. We'll help you. And this is the journal entry. So what sort of information do we need to correct an error? And this is the information that either as a PI you would need before you start to submit a cost transfer workflow or a salary redistribution, or this is the information that you're going to need to provide to your departmental staff or administrator so that they have everything they need to do what you're asking them to do. What needs to be corrected? Why was it not processed correctly? Is this because equipment came in 3 different orders and so its cost changed? Did you hire somebody on your startup and then your grant came in and you forgot to move them onto the grant? Did you forget tuition? How does it benefit the project aims? If you're splitting a cost, what are you basing the split on? And then over 90 days. This pops up if you've waited more than 90 days to correct a mistake. You're going to need to answer, why is it over 90 days and how are you going to avoid this in the future? Also, when you're processing these, either as a faculty member or as a staff member, they are there to maintain a correction and they are auditable. So everything that you put in here needs to accurately represent what's going on in the project. We don't want to just make things up. As a PI, you will be signing off on this and it works its way up the food chain. It comes back to the responsibility of the faculty member that they're representing things accurately and to the best of their ability at that time. It's the end of the project period. Really what I'd like to do, and I know everybody's busy, but at about the 6-month mark, I'd really like you to sit down and look at your project and go, where am I on this? Am I going to need a no-cost extension, or do I think I'm going to finish it? And it could change, but at least look at it and consider where you are and what you need to do and what can be done in the next 6 months. If you're going to need no cost extension, again, research.gov for NSF, all others through DocuSign. Good idea to let your grant accountant know that you're going to be putting in for no cost extension. And this little plug, it needs to be programmatically necessary. The research needs more time, not you need more time to get things you've already spent onto the grant, or you've got $5,000 on there you forgot to spend. It needs to be that the research needs more time. If you're going to do a no cost extension, typically the request needs to be started in 1 to 3 months out. It really depends on if it's the first no cost extension or if it's the third no cost extension, and also on your funder's specific guidelines. If you're asking for that third no cost extension, it's really a good idea to reach out to your program officer and start a dialogue with them. That can give you a sense of whether you're even going to have a chance of getting that additional no cost extension. Let's say that you're going to finish the project at the current project period. You're going to finish the research. You're going to capture accurate and applicable costs to the grant. A couple of things to keep in mind. The expenditures should clearly benefit the funded project they're applied to. You're going to want to start thinking about this again at the 6-month mark. Purchases towards the end of a grant need to have enough time to get here and be used by the grant. If you're still making purchases 1 month out from the end date, you're going to really run the risk of them not being here on time in order to be used on the grant, or even to arrive on time to post to the grant. And if that happens, the department is going to have to pick up the cost, and they're not going to be very happy with you. If you have another index under your control, then you might be able to put it on that. If you have faculty incentive, or if you have startup still, then you can put those costs onto those indexes that are under your control. You want to avoid equipment towards the end of a grant. If you absolutely need to purchase a piece of equipment at the end of a grant, you really, really, really need to collect documentation of why this is needed. And you need to be able to provide it quickly and easily for any questions from grants accounting or internal or external auditors. Again, that goes along with maintaining files, which is probably its own brown bag series. Just as a reminder, the Office of Sponsored Programs, everybody that's over here, it's Division of Research and Sponsored Programs. We'll help you on pre-award and post-award management, trying to answer questions on what's allowable, what's not allowable, how to do a no-cost extension, those type of actions. And then we have Grants Accounting Office, which is a division of Finance and Administration. This is more the fiscal side of things. And I kind of am straddling both at the moment. But there are discussions that really truly need to be had with the grant accountant. And I may have to sometimes say, you know what, that is a question for Mike Catlos, or that is really a question for Deborah Leonard, because this is hitting something that I don't know. And I really will try to let you know when you've gone beyond what I know and can answer on, and what I really need to call in people that have been here longer. And as I mentioned earlier, you'll receive an email from me. I do CC the grant accountant onto that initial email. It's not because I want them to know that there are these spending lines that look a little funky. It's more of a courtesy to use the PI that you're not going to get repeat emails about the grant ending soon. If the grant accountant sees that I've already reached out to you and said, hey, this is ending in 4 months, they're not going to reach out to you and send you an email 2 months saying, hey, your grant's ending. So that's what we're doing there. It's more of a just so that we all know what each other's doing. So that is an end of what I have to present today. I know that departmental staff are stretched in 16 different directions, and sometimes even more than that, and trying to keep track of this and then throw in grant specific stuff can sometimes get really overwhelming. I want to be here as a resource. Some of the departments use the shadow system, which was developed by Michelle Hoverston. I'm very jealous of that. I kept wanting to implement that in biological sciences, but I never had the time to get it up and running. So I think that is a wonderful system. If you use it, my hat's off to you. And really, truly, my email is a starting point. And then I want you to reach out to your departmental people if you have them, and if they help you with purchases, and start a dialogue on, is this accurate? Is this missing? What do we need to do? So at this time, if there are questions or if there's feedback on what's working for you and what's not working for you, I'd like to hear from anybody.
Thanks,
Lori,
Katie. Yeah, I was going to jump in with the one. I see one question that was just posted that I think is helpful and probably has more than one answer. But the question is, how long does it take from an expense to be posted? And do they need to be posted or just processed before the grant ends? And so a couple things I'll say, and then we'll see. Katie may have some additional information, and maybe from grants accounting, if any of them are on and would want to answer as well. I think the timing, I guess, unfortunately, I would say it really depends. I think there are, because there's so many different ways and different types of expenses that can be processed. So, if you're talking personnel versus items that come through on a P card or a purchase order, I think there is a time for each of those. It may be helpful then to consider the second part is, do they need to be processed or just processed before the grant ends? And I think the answer is basically they need to be processed. The activity for which the item was needed on the grant needs to have occurred. And then there is time to allow them to work their way through the system. So if orders have been placed on a P card, which then has a delay because you have to wait for the bill to come. And as long as the order was placed and the items were used for the project, then there can be time to allow that to actually show up and to be to actually be recorded on the index. But along the lines of what Katie said, allowing more time is always better as much as possible. So if you can anticipate and try to get things that would be needed even at the end in process sooner, that's better. But there is some allowability of time before final reporting is done for them to finish up the process.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
And
I would say, I would just to add, we do have questions occasionally, because toward the end of a funded research project, frequently there's travel to conferences to present, and we will get questions occasionally. Well, hey, I know my grant's ending at the end of the month, but can I book my travel now for a conference I'm attending in August, to present? And unfortunately, grant guidelines say that activity for which you're expending funds from the grant need to occur within the grant period. So that's just something else to keep in mind with expenditures. And as Lori said, though, conversely, it's not uncommon where an expenditure is processed and it doesn't post to the grant. It occurred within the grant period, but it didn't necessarily post to the grant until after. And usually, depending on the circumstances, that's not really that uncommon. So I think just the best course of action is to check with our office, either Katie or me, or your assigned grants accountant for the project you have, if you had questions before you move forward with posting expenditures. I don't see we have any more questions. One just posted.
How do we handle the remaining funds for a fixed price project after completion? So that is really kind of a different situation. I think the first thing that we would say for that is that we do really want to try to be as close as possible still in our budgeting and expending. So that's the first thing that we would do with a fixed price when we get to the end, is to look, and if there is a high balance, meaning a high percentage of the funds remaining, that is something that could really draw red flags from auditors, in terms of why so much was budgeted and requested for a project if it wasn't needed. So I would say the first piece for that is that we want to make sure that all activity that occurred for the project is charged within that time. And that's something that I think also, as Katie said, that maybe isn't necessarily in the first step she's looking at, but that, is something we'll hope to address as we are able to expand the activity for this. Once the project is closed, then there usually would be a message from grants accounting with information about how that is going to be transferred to, and typically some choices with the PI and the department as to where those funds go. But I think we would just say that we want to keep those amounts hopefully to a minimal amount so that it's not a significant part of the budget. Let's see, another question came in. How do we monitor grants that have indirect costs? I usually keep a record of the expenses based on invoices, but I'm assuming that some costs are being added to these categories as indirect, or the indirect costs added as a separate category. So indirect costs you'll see them on your spending plan and on the budget and banner, are a separate cost category that are based on the university's percentage rate as it's budgeted. And as each direct cost item is charged, the related indirect costs will automatically be charged. So they are always up to date in terms of what you're seeing, if you're seeing the actual expenses. In general, if you're looking at the bottom line, I think you could do a quick calculation to just reduce out that budget amount if you want to see how much you have in direct costs. Now, there are some changes to budget categories that could cause the amount of indirect costs to change. And so if we're really going through and doing a review, we may want to take a look at that if that amount needs to be changed because the budgeted direct costs have changed. But for general figuring, if you're looking at direct costs, you could just subtract that amount. And I don't know if Katie has any other tips, and as she's been looking at them, that would be helpful in considering that.
So really, there are only a few categories that are indirect cost exempt that you'll run into often. And that would be tuition, equipment, and subawards over that first $25,000. There's one other that I'm forgetting. I don't know, but those are the ones that come to mind. So if you have tuition on there and you budgeted for $3,000 worth of it, and you've put on $15,000 worth of tuition because you budgeted for dissertation 2 students, but you got new grad students, you're going to need to keep in the back of your mind that your indirect costs might be a little off. When you go up in an item like equipment or tuition, that is not as painful as if you budgeted for $50,000 worth of tuition, but you didn't use it. And you thought that you had that money and you spent $45,000 over in supplies. That's going to put you in a bind. So if you're looking at your grant overall and one of those indirect cost lines is well out of whack, that would be a time to reach out and say, hey, can we do a budget revision? I've gone way over or way under in tuition. I've gone way over or under in equipment, or I know that this subaward is not going to use the rest of this money. They've told me we're done. We would want to do a budget revision so that you can easily plan out the rest of your grant.
And it was just timed in. The participant cost is probably the other significant one. There are a few other smaller things that are not used as often, but participant costs on
thank you.
Some projects are especially significant. Are there any other questions? Any feedback, tips, or tricks anyone has in mind?
Well, maybe while people are typing, I could talk a little bit off script about, what we envision long term for this position. What the priorities are now are to identify expenditures in the shorter term that can legitimately be posted. And I think as Katie gets in the groove with that and gets on a regular schedule with monitoring expenditures for grants, expanding the scope beyond research grants to, other types of sponsored projects we have, but also, I think part of what we have seen as some of the biggest challenges in the departments in monitoring grants is really understanding all of the university systems that touch on grants, such as Payment Works, Rome River for travel, paying a student, and how that factors in the financial aid office, and developing documentation that will assist and posting that on our web pages for sponsored programs, and providing assistance through self-service resources, but also, there's turnover, and as maybe a new person is hired in a department and part of their job will be to oversee grants, is perhaps sitting down with them and going over standard processes and resources at the university. So I think, that's what we're looking at long-term, just to try to really make it so that there is a, valid resource here that you can call, and obviously you can call any of us at any time, but regarding expenditures and monitoring them and processing expenditures, to know who to call to get some assistance here. And I'd have to say, so far, even in the 2 months, I think we really made great stride, and Katie's been able to develop some really active working relationships with PIs who are now reaching out to her regularly and wanting to meet, and I think that's terrific. So I see, early successes that I think we'll be able to build on over the long term.
And I see there's one more question that's maybe somewhat along those lines about a PI stating that they use a shadow system on personal awards. Will you help in resolving these when I have problems or questions? I guess I would say that may depend. I think with the volume of awards, we probably can't take be too involved in kind of regular monitoring and tracking of those. But I think certainly in terms of helping, with kind of the point checks in time and spot checking things, I think that could be a help. So I guess it may depend on exactly how much involvement you're looking for, but I would encourage you, if you're interested in that or have questions, you could reach out to Katie and she may have some input, either if you're looking at either just getting things set up or with questions or problems along the way. And the other part of that, I think, is if we're talking about problems or questions with getting things processed and getting them through systems and showing up, that's definitely the kind of thing that she can assist with. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
And I don't know if we mentioned Lori, but, and I neglected to mention this at the beginning, but Lori did drop the PowerPoint of the presentations in the chat if you're interested. And again, we are recording this, so we'll make that available to everyone. I know some folks could not attend today, but for anyone who's interested, we'll send that around later when that's available.
Yes, so we'll have that all posted on our website as soon as we can. Oh, I see there's another question. What happens if we go over the budget due to changes in costs, unexpected fees? Bottom line, simple answer is that if there are costs that are over the budget, it is the responsible unit or org, which is typically a department, if we're talking the academic structure, that is responsible for that. So obviously, I think we want to try to avoid that to any significant degree. If there are, I guess if there are questions, if it's not sure, that's when it may be helpful that you could reach out to us and help for rebudgeting. Hopefully there aren't completely unexpected costs. I'm not sure if there could be unexpected, fees or that follow along with costs. But in pretty much all cases, we're not going to be able to get more money if it goes over. So the unit would be responsible for that. But if you are suspecting a problem or getting near the end, reach out to us and hopefully we can help to work that out to avoid that kind of situation, to keep it to a minimum. I see there another question about many grants would not cover meals, even if the project includes a symposium. I always try to raise additional funds. Would it be the best approach? I think, unfortunately, that is true, that there are some things that are just generally often not allowable, and meals are one of those things. So if it is possible for to raise funds from a less restrictive source, which would typically not be through a grant, maybe through some fundraising, or to use other costs that have come in, that probably is the needed approach to cover those things that are just not going to be allowable in most cases. Okay, we've had some good questions here. I want to make sure everyone who has anything has had a chance. I guess with that, any final words, Katie or Bev?
I hope that, this is beneficial. And when I started at Kent State and still now, I ask questions. I ask a lot of questions. So please don't ever feel like calling me, sending me an email, asking a question. I'm not going to judge you. You have information that you need help with. Please send me a question. I will do my best to answer it, or you might have a chance to help me learn something new and ask me something I don't know. So, send me your questions.
Well, we do learn something new every day in sponsored programs. There's always a challenge. So absolutely, don't be afraid to ask questions, and we'll do our best to try to sort out any situations that arise. But if you do think of any questions after the fact, after today's session, please feel free to reach out to Katie or me. You copy both of us, and we'll investigate for you.
Let us know if you have any ideas for topics for other sessions. We'd be happy to talk about more things and get together and all learn from one another and learn about new things. So I think with that, we'll sign off, and thank you everyone for attending today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.